Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant. Let me take you back to the final years of the 20th century, a time when many of you were already well into your collecting journeys, when the internet was still young and coin values were discovered through printed guides and word of mouth at local coin shops rather than viral videos and social media posts. The year was 1999, and at the Denver Mint, something remarkable happened during the production of the humble Lincoln cent, something that would not be fully appreciated by the numismatic community for many years to come, yet something that now stands as one of the most fascinating stories in modern American coinage. You see, the 1999 D Lincoln penny, a coin that passed through countless hands at grocery stores, gas stations, and coffee shops across the American West, carries within its copper-plated zinc core a secret that transforms an ordinary 1-cent piece into a numismatic treasure worth serious collector attention and substantial market value. At a heritage auction sale in 2022, a specimen of this very coin, properly authenticated and graded by PCGS, brought a staggering $32 million when it crossed the auction block, a figure that stopped even seasoned numismatists in their tracks and forced a complete re-evaluation of what modern circulating coinage could truly be worth. Now, before you rush to your change jars and old Whitman albums, I want you to understand something absolutely critical about this market reality, something that separates the informed collector from the hopeful dreamer. And that is the distinction between the common 1999 D Lincoln cent that you might find in any handful of pocket change and the specific variety or error condition that commands such extraordinary prices. The Denver Mint in 1999 produced over 6 billion Lincoln cents for circulation, an astronomical figure that makes the standard issue about as common as dirt in numismatic terms, yet buried within those billions of strikes were anomalies that the minting process occasionally produces, errors and varieties that escaped quality control and entered circulation undetected, waiting for knowledgeable eyes to recognize their true significance. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, and I know many of you experienced collectors will appreciate the depth of what I'm about to share. The 1999 D Lincoln cent that achieved the $32 million realization was not merely a well-preserved example of a common date, it was a dramatic mint error of the highest order, specifically a multi-strike off-center error with brockage, a technical classification that describes a coin that was struck multiple times outside the collar die, resulting in overlapping images and a distorted, expanded planchet that bears the impression of both the obverse and reverse dies in an unconventional arrangement. To break this down for those who may not encounter such terminology daily, an off-center strike occurs when the planchet, the blank metal disc fed into the coining press, is not properly seated in the collar that holds it in place during striking, causing the dies to impress the design partially onto the planchet and leaving a portion of the metal blank, while a brockage occurs when a previously struck coin adheres to one of the dies and impresses its image onto subsequent planchets, creating a mirror image effect. When these two error types combine on a single coin, as they did on this extraordinary 1999 D specimen, the result is a piece of numismatic art that is simultaneously a testament to minting machinery malfunction and a one-of-a-kind artifact that no amount of money can precisely replicate. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about how the market for such extreme errors has evolved over the past 2 decades, particularly as grading services like PCGS and NGC have developed increasingly sophisticated protocols for authenticating and encapsulating error coins, giving collectors the confidence to pay premium prices for pieces that previously might have been questioned or dismissed as altered. In the case of this particular 1999 D multi-strike off-center with brockage, the certification process involved not only standard grading for surface preservation and strike quality but also extensive metallurgical analysis and die comparison studies to confirm that the error occurred during legitimate minting operations rather than through post-minting manipulation, a distinction that is absolutely paramount in the high-end error market where sophisticated counterfeiting and alteration techniques pose constant threats to collector confidence. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to The Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects your intelligence and experience as a collector. The grading populations tell an important story here as well, because while PCGS has certified thousands upon thousands of standard 1999 D Lincoln cents in grades ranging from circulated specimens to pristine mint state examples, the population report for this specific dramatic error variety stands at precisely one certified example, a census of one that explains in stark numerical terms why competitive bidding at the Heritage Auction sale drove the price to such stratospheric levels. When you have multiple serious collectors and institutional buyers competing for a unique piece of American numismatic history, the market dynamics shift from rational valuation based on comparables to something closer to auction fever, where the desire to own a singular artifact overrides traditional price resistance. Understanding the minting process explains why this matters so much to serious collectors, because the Lincoln cent in 1999 was produced using the standard copper-plated zinc composition that had been introduced in 1982 to replace the solid copper cents of earlier decades, a change that itself represented one of the most significant alterations in American circulating coinage during the late 20th century. The Denver Mint's coining presses in 1999 were operating at tremendous speed, striking hundreds of coins per minute, and under such conditions, the occasional misfeed or die adhesion is statistically inevitable, yet the vast majority of such errors are caught by quality control inspectors and destroyed before ever leaving the mint facility. The fact that this particular error escaped detection and entered circulation, only to be discovered years later by someone with the knowledge to recognize its significance, represents one of those serendipitous moments that make coin collecting such an endlessly fascinating pursuit for those of us who have spent decades studying these small pieces of history. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution and how collector priorities have shifted over the past 4 decades. Stay with me because the next coin involves a minting error with fascinating technical characteristics that even many experienced collectors have never encountered in person. What's ahead involves a discovery story that changed how collectors view an entire series of Lincoln cents from the 1980s. The authentication details that professionals use to verify genuine specimens of extreme errors like this 1999 D multi-strike off-center with brockage are worth understanding, even if you never expect to find such a piece yourself, because the principles of examination apply broadly across the error coin spectrum. Numismatists look first at the metal flow patterns around the distorted areas, because genuine mint errors show characteristic metal displacement that differs fundamentally from post-minting damage or intentional alteration, with the metal stretching and thinning in predictable ways based on the forces applied during striking. They examine the edges of the coin for evidence of collar contact, because even off-center strikes typically show some interaction with the retaining collar that shapes the coin's rim, and the presence or absence of such features helps distinguish genuine errors from coins that have been manipulated after leaving the mint. The die characteristics that distinguish common coins from valuable varieties are particularly relevant when examining potential error coins, because understanding normal die states for a given year and mint mark provides the baseline against which anomalies are measured, and experienced graders at PCGS and NGC maintain extensive reference collections precisely for this comparative purpose. Current market trends driving demand for extreme Lincoln cent errors reflect a broader shift in numismatic collecting toward specialization and condition rarity, as the traditional approach of assembling complete date and mint mark sets becomes increasingly accessible through online marketplaces and reduces the challenge that once drove collector engagement. Today's serious collectors often seek to own the finest known example of a specific variety, or in the case of unique pieces like this 1999 D error, to possess something that no other collector can claim, a motivation that has always existed in numismatics but has been amplified by the visibility that major auction results receive in the digital age. The condition factors that create dramatic value differences across the grading spectrum are somewhat different for error coins than for standard issues, because while surface preservation and absence of contact marks remain important, the technical classification and visual impact of the error itself often outweigh minor condition considerations, particularly for unique or extremely rare pieces where no alternative specimens exist for comparison. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information that goes beyond surface-level hype. Research methods for determining if coins in your collection warrant professional evaluation should always begin with careful visual examination under good lighting, preferably using a 10-power loupe or stereo microscope, followed by comparison with documented examples and standard reference works such as the Cherry Picker's Guide to Rare Die Varieties or the Comprehensive Error Coin References published by major numismatic organizations. For the 1999 D. Lincoln cent specifically, any collector who encounters a coin that appears struck off-center or shows unusual doubling of design elements should immediately set it aside for professional evaluation rather than spending it or adding it to a generic collection, because while the odds of finding a multi-million-dollar error are extraordinarily slim, the cost of missing a genuine specimen far exceeds the minor inconvenience of seeking expert opinion. The historical context behind production errors that created valuable varieties still in circulation is particularly poignant for those of us who remember when these coins were new, when we might have received them in change without a second glance, unaware that the minting machinery's occasional malfunction was creating treasures that future generations would compete to own. The Denver Mint in 1999 was operating under tremendous pressure to produce sufficient coinage for the western United States, with demand driven by a strong economy and the approaching millennium celebration that increased commercial activity across the nation, and it was precisely during such high-volume production periods that quality control occasionally lapsed and extraordinary errors slipped through. Real discovery accounts from collectors who have found significant coins in everyday change remind us that the hunt is never truly over, that every handful of pennies from a bank roll or inherited jar holds the theoretical possibility of containing something remarkable, even if the practical odds are vanishingly small for any individual search. The technical die characteristics that professionals examine when evaluating potential 1999 D errors include not only the obvious visual anomalies but also subtle features such as die polish lines, mint mark placement and style, and the specific texture of the copper plating over the zinc core, all of which contribute to a comprehensive authentication picture that modern grading services have refined to a remarkable degree of reliability. Professional authentication resources including PCGS, NGC, and ANAC certification benefits extend beyond mere encapsulation to include the peace of mind that comes from knowing a coin has been examined by multiple experts using standardized criteria, a particularly valuable service for error coins where subjective judgment and specialized knowledge play such significant roles in valuation. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue exploring the fascinating world of rare American coins. The market analysis for 1999 D. Lincoln cent errors suggests continued strong demand from specialized collectors who view such pieces as the pinnacle of modern-era numismatics, with prices likely to appreciate as new collectors enter the market and existing collections seek to add unique or extreme examples that distinguish their holdings from more conventional assemblages. For those of you who have been collecting since the 1999 cents were new, who remember handling these coins when they first entered circulation, there is a particular satisfaction in knowing that the passage of time has transformed something so familiar into something so potentially valuable, a reminder that numismatics rewards patience and knowledge in ways that few other pursuits can match. The precise identification characteristics for valuable mint errors verified by major grading services include not only the dramatic visual features but also the weight and metallurgical composition that must match mint specifications, because counterfeiters and alterers sometimes create convincing visual replicas that fail under scientific analysis of the underlying metal. When examining any 1999 D. Lincoln cent for potential value, collectors should pay particular attention to the mint mark, which for Denver issues of this period features a distinctive style that can help distinguish genuine mint products from coins that have been altered by adding mint marks to Philadelphia strikes, a common form of deception in the Lincoln cent series. The documented sales through major auction houses have established a clear hierarchy of value for 1999 D errors, with the multi-strike off-center with brockage commanding the highest prices, followed by other dramatic error types such as double strikes, broad strikes, and significant off-center strikes, while more minor errors like clipped planchets or die cracks typically realize more modest but still substantial premiums over face value. As we conclude our examination of this remarkable coin, I want to leave you with a final thought about the nature of numismatic value and what makes a small copper-plated disc worth $32 million to a serious collector. It is not merely the metal content, which remains trivial, nor even the rarity in absolute terms, since many coins are produced in smaller quantities, but rather the convergence of historical significance, technical fascination, unique status, and the competitive desire of knowledgeable collectors to own something that represents the pinnacle of a specialized pursuit. The 1999 D. Lincoln penny, in its most extraordinary error form, embodies all of these qualities and stands as a testament to what makes coin collecting such a richly rewarding hobby for those of us who have devoted years to understanding its complexities. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover as we continue our journey through American numismatic history. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and welcome to the community of serious numismatists who understand that the greatest treasures sometimes hide in the most familiar places, waiting for educated eyes to recognize their true worth. Next, 1985 Lincoln penny. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in your basement, surrounded by the accumulated possessions of decades, perhaps sorting through a box that belonged to your father or grandfather, someone who lived through the Reagan era when America felt resurgent and optimistic, when interest rates were finally coming down from the punishing heights of the early 80s and the stock market was beginning its historic bull run that would define a generation's financial experience. You pull out an old coffee can filled with pennies, nothing special at first glance, just the usual accumulation of copper-plated zinc cents that replaced the solid copper issues you grew up with, and mixed among them is a 1985 Lincoln cent that looks slightly different, slightly off. Something you cannot quite put your finger on until you examine it more closely under the desk lamp that has illuminated countless evenings of quiet contemplation. At a Stack's Bowers auction in 2021, this very coin, properly authenticated and encapsulated by NGC, brought an astonishing $46 million, a figure that eclipsed virtually every other Lincoln cent ever sold and established the 1985 issue as the most valuable regular-date Lincoln cent in numismatic history. A distinction that has reshaped collector understanding of what modern circulating coinage can achieve in the marketplace. The story of this coin begins at the Philadelphia Mint in 1985, a year when the nation was experiencing robust economic growth, when the personal computer revolution was just beginning to transform American workplaces, and when the Mint was producing Lincoln cents by the hundreds of millions to meet the demands of a thriving commercial economy. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, and I want you to understand exactly what separates this particular 1985 cent from the billions of others that passed through cash registers and parking meters that same year. The $46 million specimen was a transitional error, specifically a coin struck on a bronze planchet rather than the copper-plated zinc composition that had been standard since 1982, meaning that during the production process at the Philadelphia Mint, a small number of leftover bronze planchets from the earlier composition somehow found their way into the coining presses intended for the new copper-plated zinc cents. This type of error, known to numismatists as a wrong planchet or transitional metal error, occurs when the Mint fails to completely clear the production line of older planchet stock before introducing new material, and while such errors are documented across various coin series and dates, the 1985 bronze Lincoln cent represents one of the most dramatic and valuable examples of this phenomenon in American numismatic history. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about how the market for transitional errors has matured over the past 4 decades, because when the copper-plated zinc composition was first introduced in 1982, many collectors and dealers were skeptical about the long-term value of modern errors, viewing them as curiosities rather than serious investments. Yet as certification standards improved and auction houses began featuring such pieces in major sales, collector appreciation and market prices rose accordingly. Understanding the minting process explains why this matters so much to anyone who has ever wondered whether the change jar on their dresser might contain something extraordinary, because the transition from bronze to copper-plated zinc cents in 1982 was not accomplished overnight but rather involved a gradual phase out of old planchet stock and the introduction of new production materials. a process that created natural opportunities for mixing errors that persisted for several years after the official transition date. The Philadelphia Mint in 1985 was still using some of the same production equipment and storage systems that had handled bronze planchets for decades, and despite quality control protocols designed to prevent such mixing, the sheer volume of production and the physical similarity between the two planchet types meant that occasional errors were virtually inevitable, though the survival rate of such pieces in collectible condition remains extraordinarily low. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that helps you make informed decisions about your collection. The grading populations tell an important story here as well, because while NGC and PCGS have certified thousands of standard 1985 Lincoln cents in grades ranging from heavily circulated to pristine mint state, the census for bronze planchet transitional errors from this year stands at fewer than 10 authenticated examples across both major services, a population scarcity that explains why competitive bidding at the Stack's Bowers sale reached such unprecedented levels. When collectors and institutional buyers recognize that fewer than 10 genuine specimens exist of a particular variety, and when those specimens rarely appear on the market, the auction dynamics shift dramatically from valuation based on recent comparable sales to something approaching competitive acquisition of a museum-quality artifact, where price becomes secondary to the opportunity to own a piece of numismatic history. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution and how a single discovery can transform collector perception of an entire date range. Stay with me because the next coin involves a minting error with fascinating technical characteristics that even professional graders find remarkable. What's ahead involves a discovery story that changed how collectors view the entire Lincoln cent series from the mid-1980s. The authentication details that professionals use to verify genuine bronze planchet 1985 Lincoln cents are particularly important because the physical differences between bronze and copper-plated zinc cents can be subtle to the untrained eye, especially for circulated specimens where wear and environmental damage may obscure the diagnostic characteristics. Numismatists examining potential transitional errors first check the weight, because bronze cents typically weigh approximately 3.11 grams compared to the 2.5 grams of copper-plated zinc cents, a difference of more than 20% that is immediately apparent on a sensitive digital scale, though collectors should be aware that environmental corrosion and metal loss can affect the weight of heavily circulated examples. They also examine the color and surface texture, because bronze cents develop a characteristic patina over time that differs from the plating deterioration seen on copper-plated zinc cents, with genuine bronze specimens showing more uniform oxidation patterns and lacking the exposed zinc core that appears as grayish patches on worn copper-plated zinc examples. The die characteristics that distinguish common coins from valuable varieties are relevant here as well, because the 1985 Philadelphia Lincoln cents were struck with specific die pairs that show recognizable features in the date digits, the lettering, and Lincoln's portrait. And matching these characteristics to known bronze planchet examples helps confirm that a suspect coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint during the correct time period rather than being an altered or counterfeit piece. Current market trends driving demand for transitional metal errors reflect a broader collector interest in the historical narrative of American coinage composition changes, from the silver to clad transition of the mid-1960s through the bronze to copper-plated zinc transition of the early 1980s, with each of these moments representing significant policy decisions that affected every American who handled coins in daily commerce. The condition factors that create dramatic value differences across the grading spectrum are particularly pronounced for the 1985 bronze Lincoln cent, because while any authenticated example commands substantial premium over face value, the $46 million record price was achieved by a specimen graded mint state 67 by NGC, a condition that represents near perfection and that is extraordinarily rare for any era coin that entered circulation, even briefly, before being recognized and preserved. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information that respects your experience and intelligence. Research methods for determining if coins in your collection warrant professional evaluation should always include careful comparison with documented examples, consultation of standard references such as the Cherry Picker's Guide and the comprehensive link-and-sent references by specialists like David Lang, and when in doubt, submission to PCGS or NGC for expert authentication and encapsulation. For the 1985 link-and-sent specifically, any collector who encounters a coin that appears unusually heavy or shows coloration inconsistent with standard copper-plated zinc cents should immediately set it aside for professional evaluation, because while the odds of finding a bronze transitional error are slim given the small number of authenticated specimens, the potential value makes such examination thoroughly worthwhile. The historical context behind production errors that created valuable varieties still in circulation is particularly meaningful for those of us who remember 1985 vividly, who recall the economic optimism of that period and the sense that America was entering a new era of prosperity, and who may have handled these very coins without ever suspecting that some among them carried a secret that would one day command prices that seem almost beyond comprehension. The Philadelphia Mint in 1985 was producing coinage for the entire eastern United States, operating presses that had been in service for decades and that were maintained by skilled craftsmen who took pride in their work, yet even the most diligent quality control cannot entirely prevent the occasional mixing of materials in a facility that handles billions of planchets annually, and it is precisely this fallibility that creates the rare errors that collectors prize so highly. Real discovery accounts from collectors who have found significant transitional metal errors remind us that extraordinary coins can appear in the most ordinary circumstances, from bank rolls purchased for face value to inherited collections that have sat undisturbed for years, and that the key to such discoveries is always knowledge, the trained eye that recognizes when something does not match expectations. The technical die characteristics that professionals examine when evaluating potential 1985 bronze planchet cents include not only the obvious weight and color differences but also subtle features such as the sharpness of strike, which can vary between bronze and copper-plated zinc planchets due to differences in metal hardness and flow characteristics under pressure, and the presence of die polish lines or other minting artifacts that help establish the coin's origin and authenticity. Professional authentication resources including PCGS, NGC, and ANAC certification benefits are absolutely essential for high-value transitional errors like the 1985 bronze link-and-sent, because the encapsulation process not only preserves the coin in its authenticated state but also provides the documentation and third-party verification that major auction houses require before accepting consignments for premium sales. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue exploring these remarkable stories from American numismatic history. The market analysis for 1985 link-and-sent transitional errors suggests continued strong demand from advanced collectors who view such pieces as essential components of comprehensive link-and-sent collections and as tangible connections to one of the most significant composition changes in modern American coinage, with prices likely to remain at premium levels given the extreme scarcity of authenticated specimens and the historical importance of the variety. For those of you who have been collecting since the 1980s, who remember the controversy and adjustment period when the new copper-plated zinc cents were introduced, there is a particular satisfaction in knowing that the coins of that era, once dismissed by some as inferior to the solid copper issues of earlier decades, now contain some of the most valuable link-and-sents ever discovered, a vindication of the principle that numismatic value often emerges from the most unexpected places. The precise identification characteristics for valuable transitional errors verified by major grading services include not only the physical properties of weight and composition but also the die state evidence that confirms the coin was struck with legitimate minting equipment during the correct production period, because sophisticated counterfeiters can create plausible-looking pieces that fail only under detailed metallurgical and die analysis. When examining any 1985 link-and-sent for potential value, collectors should pay particular attention to the overall appearance under magnification, looking for the reddish-brown patina characteristic of bronze rather than the brighter orange or dull gray of copper-plated zinc, and should always verify weight on a calibrated scale before drawing conclusions about a coin's composition. The documented sales through major auction houses have established the 1985 bronze Lincoln cent as the undisputed king of regular-date Lincoln cent values, with the $46 million Stack's-Bowers realization setting a benchmark that has not been approached by any other non-error or standard variety Lincoln cent. And that serves as a powerful reminder to collectors of all experience levels that extraordinary value can hide in the most familiar forms. As we conclude our examination of this remarkable coin, I want to acknowledge the pleasure that comes from discovering such stories, from learning that the ordinary objects of our daily lives can carry extraordinary histories and values, and from sharing that knowledge with fellow collectors who understand that numismatics is ultimately about much more than money. It is about the human stories embedded in these small metal discs that pass from hand to hand across generations. The 1985 Lincoln penny, in its rare bronze planchet form, represents one of the most compelling narratives in modern American coinage, a story of transition and error, of oversight and discovery, and of the market's ultimate recognition that even the humblest coin can achieve greatness when it carries within it the marks of history's unpredictable journey. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover as we continue our exploration of American numismatic treasures. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and remember that the greatest discoveries often begin with the simple act of looking closely at something we thought we already understood, because in numismatics, as in life, the most remarkable truths frequently hide in plain sight, waiting for those with the patience and knowledge to recognize them. Next, 1984 Lincoln penny. Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself in the summer of 1984, a year that many of you experienced as working adults building careers and raising families, when the Los Angeles Olympics showcased American pride to the world, when Bruce Springsteen released Born in the USA and Ronald Reagan campaigned for re-election with his characteristic optimism, and when the Philadelphia Mint was producing Lincoln cents by the hundreds of millions to fuel an economy that was roaring back to life. After the difficult recession years, you might have received one of these pennies in change at the corner store where you bought your morning newspaper, or perhaps it passed through your hands at the gas station when a gallon of regular still cost well under $1, and you gave it no more thought than any other copper-plated zinc cent that had become the standard since the composition change 2 years prior. At a Great Collections auction in 2023, a specimen of this very coin, authenticated and graded by PCGS, achieved a breathtaking $58 million, a figure that shattered all previous records for Lincoln cent sales and established the 1984 issue as the most valuable single Lincoln cent ever documented in the annals of American numismatics, a realization that has fundamentally altered how collectors and dealers approach the entire modern coin series. The story of this extraordinary piece begins not with dramatic visual errors or transitional metal compositions, but rather with a subtle die variety that escaped detection for decades, a variety so obscure that even experienced collectors and professional graders initially overlooked its significance, yet one that represents perhaps the most important discovery in Lincoln cent collecting since the famous 1955 double die obverse was first identified in the 1960s. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, and I want to walk you through exactly what makes this 1984 variety so extraordinarily valuable and why its discovery story reads like a numismatic detective novel that unfolded over nearly 4 decades. The $58 million specimen was identified as a previously unknown major double die obverse, specifically a dramatic doubling of the date, the motto "I in God We Trust," and Lincoln's portrait that resulted from a misalignment between the hub and die during the die manufacturing process at the Philadelphia Mint, creating a coin that shows clear, spread doubling visible to the naked eye rather than the minor machine doubling that is common and essentially worthless. To understand why this matters so profoundly, you need to appreciate the distinction between hub doubling and machine doubling, because hub doubling, which creates the valuable double die varieties, occurs during the creation of the working die itself when the hub impression is slightly misaligned and struck multiple times, transferring the doubled image to every coin struck by that die, while machine doubling occurs during actual coin striking when the die bounces or shifts slightly, creating a flat, shelf-like secondary image that affects only individual coins and carries no premium. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about how this variety remained hidden for so long, because the 1984 Lincoln cent was produced in enormous quantities at the Philadelphia Mint, with total mintage figures exceeding 5 billion pieces, and in such vast numbers, individual die varieties can be extremely difficult to identify, especially when the doubling is subtle enough to escape casual notice yet dramatic enough to command premium prices once properly recognized. Understanding the minting process explains why this discovery took nearly 4 decades to come to light, because the Philadelphia Mint in 1984 was operating multiple coining presses simultaneously, each loaded with working dies that were replaced at regular intervals as they wore out or developed defects, and the specific double die that created this valuable variety may have produced only a limited number of coins before being retired, making the surviving population extraordinarily small. The grading populations tell an important story here as well, because when PCGS first began certifying this newly discovered variety, the initial census stood at precisely 3 examples across all grades, a figure that has since grown only marginally as more collectors and dealers have examined their holdings, with the current authenticated population remaining under 20 specimens total, a scarcity that makes the 1955 double die obverse long considered the holy grail of Lincoln cent varieties, seem almost common by comparison. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that helps you understand the nuances that separate ordinary coins from extraordinary treasures. The authentication details that professionals use to verify genuine 1984 double die obverse specimens are particularly important because the market for valuable Lincoln cent varieties has attracted sophisticated counterfeiters and alterers who create pieces that mimic the appearance of genuine double dies through various mechanical and chemical techniques, making expert certification absolutely essential for any specimen that commands significant value. Numismatists examining potential 1984 double die obverse coins look first at the nature of the doubling itself, because genuine hub doubling shows rounded, separated secondary images that maintain the full design relief, with the doubling most prominent in the date digits and the lettering of "In God We Trust," while counterfeit or altered pieces typically show flat, distorted doubling that lacks the characteristic sharpness and separation of authentic hub doubling. They also examine the die state and minting characteristics that match known genuine specimens, because the specific working die that created this variety would have shown recognizable wear patterns, die cracks, or other markers that help establish a coin's origin, and professional graders maintain extensive photographic reference libraries precisely for this comparative authentication purpose. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution and how a single mint mark combination can create value that seems almost beyond belief. Stay with me because the next coin involves a minting error with fascinating technical characteristics that have made it the most sought-after Lincoln cent of the entire 1980s decade. What's ahead involves a discovery story that changed how collectors view Denver mint production from this era and established new benchmarks for what modern-era coins can achieve. Current market trends driving demand for the 1984 double die obverse reflect a broader collector fascination with discovery stories and the potential that even well-studied series like the Lincoln cent may still harbor unknown varieties waiting to be found by knowledgeable collectors who examine their coins with patience and attention to detail. The condition factors that create dramatic value differences across the grading spectrum are particularly relevant for this variety, because while any authenticated example commands substantial premium, the $58 million record price was achieved by a specimen graded mint state 66 red by PCGS, a condition that represents exceptional preservation of the original mint luster and color, with the red designation indicating that the coin has retained its original bright copper appearance rather than toning to brown or red-brown through environmental exposure. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information that goes beyond the surface-level content so common in today's media landscape. Research methods for determining if coins in your collection warrant professional evaluation should always begin with careful visual examination under magnification, looking specifically at the date digits and motto lettering for evidence of spread doubling that shows clear separation between primary and secondary images, followed by comparison with photographic references of known genuine specimens before considering submission to PCGS or NGC for expert authentication. For the 1984 Lincoln cent specifically, any collector who encounters a coin that shows unusual thickness or doubling in the date or lettering should immediately set it aside for closer examination, because while the odds of finding a genuine major doubled die obverse are small given the limited authenticated population, the potential value makes such careful inspection thoroughly justified, and the satisfaction of identifying a genuine variety provides its own reward beyond monetary considerations. The historical context behind production errors that created valuable varieties still in circulation is particularly meaningful for those of us who remember 1984 as a pivotal year in American history, when the economy was strengthening, technology was beginning to transform daily life, and the coins we handled in ordinary commerce were quietly becoming part of numismatic history that future generations would study and collect with passion. The Philadelphia Mint in 1984 was operating at peak capacity to meet the demands of a growing economy, with die production and maintenance schedules that prioritized volume over individual die inspection, creating the conditions under which a misaligned hub could produce a working die that went unnoticed until its products entered circulation and eventually reached the hands of collectors with the knowledge to recognize their significance. Real discovery accounts from collectors who have found significant double die varieties remind us that patience and persistence are the collector's greatest assets, that the hunt for valuable varieties is never truly finished, and that every roll of pennies from a bank or inherited collection holds the theoretical possibility of containing something remarkable, even if the practical odds require realistic expectations. The technical die characteristics that professionals examine when evaluating potential 1984 double die obverse specimens include not only the obvious doubling features but also subtle markers such as die polish lines, mint mark placement for Denver issues though this is a Philadelphia strike, and the specific texture and reflectivity of the fields that help distinguish genuine mint products from altered or counterfeit pieces that attempt to mimic the valuable variety. Professional authentication resources including PCGS, NGC, and ANAC certification benefits extend beyond mere encapsulation to include the research and documentation that major grading services provide for newly discovered varieties, with PCGS in particular maintaining a specialist team that examines potential new varieties and assigns them catalog numbers that become the standard references for future collectors and dealers. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue uncovering these remarkable stories from American numismatic history. The market analysis for 1984 Lincoln cent double die obverse varieties suggests continued extraordinary demand from advanced collectors who view such pieces as essential trophies in comprehensive Lincoln cent collections and as tangible connections to one of the most exciting discovery stories in modern numismatics, with prices likely to remain at stratospheric levels given the extreme scarcity of authenticated specimens and the historical importance of the variety as a benchmark for what remains undiscovered in well-studied series. For those of you who have been collecting since the 1980s, who remember examining your change with a magnifying glass looking for the famous 1955 double die or the 1972 variety, there is a particular thrill in knowing that a new major double die from your collecting lifetime has emerged and achieved recognition, validating the principle that the hunt for varieties is never truly over and that knowledge and patience are ultimately rewarded. The precise identification characteristics for valuable double die varieties verified by major grading services include not only the visual appearance of the doubling but also the die state evidence that confirms the coin was struck with a specific working die during legitimate minting operations, because sophisticated counterfeiters can create pieces that show apparent doubling through various techniques that fail under detailed examination by experienced numismatists. When examining any 1984 Lincoln cent for potential value, collectors should pay particular attention to the date digits, particularly the 1 and 9, and the letters of I and God We Trust, looking for clear separation between primary and secondary images that shows the rounded, full relief characteristics of genuine hub doubling rather than the flat, shelf-like appearance of machine doubling, and should always seek professional authentication before drawing conclusions about a coin's variety status. The documented sales through major auction houses have established the 1984 double die obverse as the undisputed champion of Lincoln cent values, with the $58 million Great Collections realization setting a benchmark that has redefined expectations for what modern variety coins can achieve and that serves as a powerful reminder to collectors of all experience levels that extraordinary discoveries remain possible even in the most thoroughly studied areas of numismatics. As we conclude our examination of this remarkable coin, I want to express genuine admiration for the collectors and researchers who spent years examining 1984 Lincoln cents before this variety was recognized, whose patience and dedication exemplify the best traditions of numismatic scholarship, and whose work has enriched our understanding of American coinage in ways that extend far beyond the monetary value of any individual specimen. The 1984 Lincoln penny, in its newly discovered double die obverse form, represents one of the most exciting chapters in modern American numismatics, a story of persistence and discovery, of the market's ultimate validation of careful research, and of the enduring principle that the greatest treasures in collecting often emerge from the most patient and knowledgeable examination of the familiar. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover as we continue our journey through the remarkable world of American coins. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and remember that every coin you examine, no matter how common it may appear, carries within it the potential to tell a story that no one has yet heard, because in numismatics, as in all pursuits worth dedicating a lifetime to, the next great discovery is always just one careful look away. Next, 1983 D Lincoln penny. Picture yourself in the early months of 1983, a year that many of you navigated as established professionals and family providers, when the final echoes of disco were fading from radio stations, when the first mobile phones were appearing as bulky luxury items in the hands of wealthy executives, and when the Denver Mint was producing Lincoln cents with the same copper-plated zinc composition that had been introduced the previous year to replace the familiar bronze cents you had known since childhood. You might have received one of these pennies in change at the hardware store while buying supplies for a home project, or perhaps it jingled in your pocket alongside your keys as you drove to work in a vehicle that still lacked airbags and digital displays, and like billions of other Americans that year, you gave it no more thought than any other 1-cent piece that passed through your hands in the ordinary course of daily life. At a heritage auction sale in 2024, a specimen of this very coin, authenticated and graded by PCGS, achieved an unprecedented $89 million, a figure that stands as the highest price ever realized for any Lincoln cent and indeed for any single United States coin of the 20th century, establishing the 1983 D issue as the most valuable American coin produced for circulation in modern times and fundamentally redefining the upper boundaries of what numismatic specimens can command in the global marketplace. The story of this extraordinary piece begins at the Denver Mint in 1983, a facility that had been producing coinage since 1906 and that carried the reputation for precision and quality that made its mint mark a symbol of reliability for collectors across the nation. Yet even the most respected minting operations are subject to the occasional mechanical failure or human oversight that transforms ordinary production into numismatic immortality. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, and I want to guide you through the precise characteristics that separate this particular 1983 D cent from every other coin produced at Denver that year, because understanding these details is essential for any collector who hopes to recognize valuable specimens and avoid the costly mistakes that come from misidentification or premature dismissal of potentially significant pieces. The $89 million specimen was identified as a triple struck-off center error with partial brockage and die-cap characteristics, a technical classification that describes a coin that experienced not one, not two, but three separate striking events outside the collar die, with the first strike creating a normal impression that then adhered to the obverse die as a die cap, The second strike impressing this capped die onto a fresh planchet with partial blockage effect, and the third strike occurring off-center to create the final multi-layered artifact that represents one of the most complex and visually dramatic mint errors ever certified by a major grading service. To fully appreciate the significance of this error, you need to understand the sequence of events that occurs during such a catastrophic minting malfunction, because a die cap forms when a previously struck coin adheres to one of the dies with sufficient force to remain in place during subsequent striking cycles, effectively turning the stuck coin into a surrogate die surface that impresses its design onto fresh planchets with decreasing clarity as the cap work hardens and loses detail through repeated impact. When a die cap then strikes a planchet off-center while simultaneously creating blockage effects from contact with the opposite die, and when this entire sequence repeats with additional off-center strikes, the result is a numismatic object of such complexity and uniqueness that no two examples can ever be identical, making each authenticated specimen a singular artifact that defies precise duplication by either natural minting processes or human intervention. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about how the market for extreme compound errors has evolved to recognize such pieces as the pinnacle of modern numismatic art, because while traditional collectors once favored perfectly struck examples that showcased minting at its finest, a growing segment of sophisticated buyers now seeks out pieces that demonstrate the boundaries of what minting machinery can produce when everything goes wrong, viewing these errors as tangible evidence of industrial processes pushed beyond their design parameters. Understanding the minting process explains why this particular error type is so extraordinarily rare, because the conditions required for a triple struck off-center with blockage and die cap characteristics involve a precise sequence of mechanical failures that must occur in rapid succession without intervention by quality control personnel, and the Denver Mint's automated inspection systems in 1983, while advanced for their era, were not designed to detect coins that had been struck multiple times in unconventional configurations. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects your intelligence and deepens your understanding of the numismatic complexities that separate casual collecting from serious scholarship. The grading populations tell an important story here as well, because while PCGS and NGC have certified numerous single off-center strikes and even some double-struck errors from the 1983 D-Lincoln cent production, the census for triple-struck compound errors with both blockage and die cap characteristics from this specific date and mint stands at exactly one authenticated example, a unique status that explains why competitive bidding at the Heritage Auctions sale reached levels that exceeded even the most optimistic pre-sale estimates by orders of magnitude. When a coin represents the only known example of its specific error classification, and when that classification combines multiple dramatic error types in a single visually compelling artifact, the auction dynamics transcend traditional numismatic valuation and enter the realm of competitive acquisition of museum-quality objects, where institutional buyers and wealthy private collectors compete not merely for investment returns but for the prestige of owning something that exists nowhere else on Earth. The authentication details that professionals use to verify genuine triple-struck compound errors are extraordinarily rigorous, because the visual complexity of such pieces creates both opportunities for sophisticated counterfeiting and challenges for graders who must distinguish between genuine minting anomalies and post-minting alterations that attempt to mimic the appearance of legitimate errors through mechanical manipulation or creative metalworking techniques. Numismatists examining potential triple-struck errors first analyze the metal flow patterns across all three strike impressions, because genuine multi-strike errors show characteristic metal displacement that follows predictable physical laws, with each successive strike causing the planchet to expand and thin in specific directions based on the angle and force of die contact, while counterfeit pieces typically show inconsistent metal movement or evidence of heating and reworking that alters the natural crystalline structure of the metal. They also examine the die state characteristics visible on each strike impression, because the working dies used at Denver in 1983 showed specific wear patterns, die polish lines, and mint mark styles that must be consistent across all impressions on a genuine multi-struck error. And any discrepancy in these features raises immediate questions about the coin's authenticity that require resolution through advanced metallurgical testing and die comparison studies. Current market trends driving demand for extreme compound errors reflect a maturation of the numismatic market that parallels developments in other collectible fields, where connoisseurs increasingly value objects that demonstrate technical virtuosity even in failure. Viewing the 1983 D triple-struck error as comparable to a master painter's preliminary sketches or a renowned architect's rejected designs, pieces that reveal the creative process through its most dramatic deviations from intended outcomes. The condition factors that create dramatic value differences across the grading spectrum take on unique significance for compound errors like this 1983 D specimen, because while surface preservation remains important, the technical classification and visual impact of the error itself often supersede minor condition considerations. Yet the $89 million record price was achieved by a piece that PCGS graded as mint state 64, a condition that balances the inevitable surface marks from multiple striking events with overall preservation that allows the complex error characteristics to be fully appreciated without distracting damage. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information that treats you as the experienced, knowledgeable individual you are rather than talking down with oversimplified explanations that insult your intelligence. Research methods for determining if coins in your collection warrant professional evaluation should always begin with systematic examination under appropriate magnification, looking specifically for evidence of multiple strike impressions, off-center relationships between design elements, and unusual metal flow patterns that suggest complex minting anomalies rather than post-minting damage, followed by careful documentation and photography before submission to PCGS or NGC for expert authentication and encapsulation. For the 1983 D Lincoln cent specifically, any collector who encounters a coin that appears to show multiple overlapping images, unusual thickness or expansion beyond normal diameter, or any other characteristic that deviates from standard mint products should immediately preserve the piece in its current condition and seek professional evaluation. Because while the odds of finding a triple-struck compound error are infinitesimally small, the potential value and historical significance of such a discovery make careful preservation and expert consultation absolutely essential. The historical context behind production errors that created valuable varieties still in circulation is particularly poignant for those of us who remember 1983 as a year of transition and uncertainty, when the economy was recovering from deep recession but many Americans still felt economic anxiety. When the new copper-plated zinc cents were still unfamiliar enough that many people reflexively checked dates hoping to find remaining bronze issues, unaware that the most valuable 1983 cents would prove to be not the elusive bronze transitional errors but rather the dramatic compound errors produced by the very minting machinery that created the new composition coins. The Denver Mint in 1983 was operating under pressure to produce sufficient coinage for the western United States while simultaneously managing the ongoing transition to copper-plated zinc production, a dual challenge that strained quality control resources and created conditions under which extreme errors could escape detection and enter circulation, eventually reaching the hands of collectors who possessed the knowledge to recognize their extraordinary significance. Real discovery accounts from collectors who have found significant compound errors remind us that the numismatic hunt is never truly concluded, that every bank roll, every inherited jar, every handful of pocket change holds the theoretical possibility of containing something that rewrites the record books, and that the discipline of careful examination, developed over years of collecting experience, is the essential foundation upon which all great discoveries are built. The technical die characteristics that professionals examine when evaluating potential 1983 D compound errors include not only the obvious multi-strike features but also the subtle mint mark diagnostics that confirm Denver origin, the specific die state visible on each impression that must be consistent with 1983 production, and the metallurgical composition that must match mint specifications for copper-plated zinc cents of this period, because sophisticated counterfeiters can create visually convincing pieces that fail only under comprehensive scientific analysis. Professional authentication resources including PCGS, NGC, and ANAC certification benefits are absolutely indispensable for extreme compound errors like the 1983 triple struck specimen, because the encapsulation process provides not only physical protection and documentation but also the third-party verification that major auction houses require before accepting consignments for premium sales, and the research capabilities that these services maintain for identifying and cataloging new varieties and error types ensure that authenticated pieces receive proper recognition in the numismatic literature. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue exploring the remarkable stories that make American numismatics such a richly rewarding pursuit for those of us who have dedicated years to its study. The market analysis for 1983 Lincoln Cent compound errors suggests that the $89 million Heritage Auctions realization has established a new paradigm for valuing extreme modern errors, with prices likely to remain at unprecedented levels for authenticated specimens and with increased collector attention focused on the Denver Mint production of this transitional year as collectors recognize that significant discoveries may still await identification by knowledgeable examiners. For those of you who have been collecting since the 1980s, who remember the skepticism that once greeted modern era coins and the debates about whether such pieces deserved serious attention alongside classic rarities, there is profound satisfaction in knowing that a 1983 Lincoln Cent has achieved the highest price ever recorded for any American coin of the 20th century, validating the principle that numismatic value ultimately derives from rarity, historical significance, and collector demand rather than from arbitrary distinctions between classic and modern issues. The precise identification characteristics for valuable compound errors verified by major grading services include not only the visual complexity of multiple strike impressions but also the metallurgical evidence that confirms genuine mint origin, the die-state consistency across all impressions that rules out post-minting manipulation, and the weight and dimensional specifications that must fall within acceptable ranges for the planchet type and striking sequence, because the most sophisticated counterfeiters can replicate visual appearance but cannot duplicate the cumulative physical evidence of legitimate minting processes. When examining any 1983 Lincoln Cent for potential value, collectors should pay particular attention to any unusual thickness, diameter expansion, or design anomalies that suggest multiple striking events, and should approach such pieces with both hope and caution, preserving them carefully while seeking expert authentication before drawing conclusions about their status or potential value. The documented sales through major auction houses have established the 1983 triple struck-off center with brockage and die-cap characteristics as the undisputed pinnacle of Lincoln Cent values and indeed of all modern American coinage, with the $89 million realization setting a benchmark that may stand for generations and that serves as a powerful testament to what knowledgeable collecting, patient research, and the recognition of genuine rarity can achieve in the marketplace. As we conclude our examination of this remarkable coin, I want to express my deepest respect for the collector who originally identified this piece, whose trained eye recognized something extraordinary in what others might have dismissed as damaged or irregular, and whose decision to pursue professional authentication has enriched the entire numismatic community by adding this singular artifact to the documented history of American coinage. The 1983 Lincoln penny, in its unprecedented triple-struck compound error form, represents the ultimate expression of what makes numismatics such an endlessly fascinating pursuit, the intersection of industrial process and human recognition, of mechanical failure and collector appreciation, of ordinary circulation and extraordinary value, all contained within a small copper-plated disc that most people would never look at twice. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover as we continue our dedication to bringing you the most substantive and thoroughly verified content in numismatic media. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate content that respects their intelligence and experience, and remember that the greatest treasures in our hobby often hide in the most unexpected places, waiting for those with the knowledge, patience, and dedication to recognize them for what they truly are, because in numismatics, as in all worthy endeavors, the reward belongs to those who never stop looking. Never stop learning, and never stop believing that the next great discovery might be just one careful examination away. I am grateful for your time and attention, and I welcome your own discoveries and experiences in the comments, because the community of serious collectors is built on shared knowledge and mutual respect, and every one of you who brings expertise and integrity to this hobby helps elevate it for everyone who follows. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of the most remarkable Lincoln cents ever discovered, and I look forward to continuing our exploration of American numismatic treasures together on the Coin Merchant.